Snow White is a musical fantasy directed by Mark Webb, from a screenplay by Erin Cressida Wilson and Greta Gerwig. The film is the newest live-action reimagining of a classic animated Disney film, the original being the 1937 film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which itself is based on the 1812 fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. The film stars Rachel Zegler, Gal Gadot, and Andrew Burnip. A beautiful princess, Snow White, takes refuge in the forest in the house of seven dwarfs to hide from her stepmother, the wicked queen. The queen is jealous because she wants to be known as the fairest in the land, and Snow White's beauty surpasses her own. The classic story comes to life as Snow White attempts to liberate her kingdom of her cruel and evil stepmother. This review will contain minor spoilers, as I'd assume most of you know the story from the original film. While I recognise the incredible artistry and historical significance of the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it is far from my favourite animated Disney movie. However, I have always loved the lore and considered it highly worthy of exploration through live-action cinema. 2012's Snow White and the Huntsman was an extremely underrated adaptation, and while I do prefer the direction that film took, 2015's Cinderella proved that you could do a mostly one-to-one adaptation, and it turned out wonderfully. Yes, this film had a troubled production. Yes, its rollout has been marred by controversy, but none of that matters now. What matters is just the quality of the film itself. So how is it? Well, the first 20 minutes is actually quite good. It expanded upon the original perfectly. It gave more context to the state of the royal family and the politics of the kingdom, and it was well directed with some particularly nice transitions during the prelude narration. I wish that we could have spent a little more time at this point of the film, because once Snow White escapes through the forest, my engagement wore thin. The sequence in the dark forest was actually pretty cool, with some colourful effects and spooky atmosphere. Despite my praise for the fleshing out of the narrative, there were a few minor plot conveniences along the way, mainly ones that lead to important events in the original story. There were a few silly moments where you would expect characters to be a little bit smarter, such as when Snow White is handed the apple in case she gets hungry when she travels, and then she just eats it right there and then. If you were wondering, yes, the apple is there, true love's kiss is there, it's all there. The main plot points of the original are there, with the addition of a sort of fourth act that I would argue actually improves upon the original story. It gives the character of Snow White more depth and purpose. It is actually the introduction to the Seven Dwarfs that turned me off. I didn't feel like the film captured the relationship between the dwarves and Snow White very well. The dwarves are portrayed as mythical creatures of sort, and not human, so the idea of them being CGI is appropriate. However, they are so terrifying to look at that it is hard to not notice that you're in the uncanny valley the entire time that they are on screen. Aside from Dopey, none of them get the amount of characterization that they deserve. They just act silly a lot, and they fail to have any real impact on the narrative. The prince character from the original is replaced in here by Jonathan, played by Andrew Burnip. Jonathan is a rebel with a group of bandits behind him. He believes in the one true king, being that of Snow White's father, and desires to defy the evil queen's monarchy. I appreciate that more time was given to the romance plot in this film when compared with the original, but if I'm honest, Jonathan and Snow White were severely lacking in chemistry, and I didn't find Jonathan to be a very entertaining character, although I did like his motivation and rebel nature. So how does Rachel Zegler fare as Snow White? she does a fine job. As much as I loved Kristen Stewart, I don't know if we have yet seen a perfectly cast live-action Snow White, although the character is admittedly hard to translate to live-action. Rachel Zegler is a good singer, and she does the best that she can with the material that she is given, which I don't think truly captures the essence of Snow White as much as it could. She doesn't get a chance to show much range, but for what she has to do, she does a good job, and honestly, her performance is the best thing in the movie. She carries this mediocre movie. I have never thought much of Gal Gadot as an actress, and the less said about her performance here, the better. I don't know how she keeps getting cast in blockbuster movies. The makeup effects for when she disguises herself as the older woman were quite good, but the transformation sequence was wasted potential. Children like to be a bit frightened. It's thrilling. This didn't capture the essence of how creepy she looked in the original film. The evil queen is a great character for an actress to sink their teeth into. Once again, I am mentioning Snow White and the Huntsman because I do think it is massively underrated. Charlize Theron chewed up that role. She was perfectly over the top and menacing. Gadot is trying to ham it up here, but it just doesn't work, and she really is not a great singer. Speaking of the songs, they are extremely forgettable. They are not offensive to the ears, but they are hardly useful, and towards the end I found myself groaning when another one would begin, especially when they were reprises. There are a few new songs, the best of which being A Hand Meets a Hand and Waiting on a Wish, but as per usual with the Disney live-action remakes, they just can't stop themselves from using auto-tune. Now, I'm not ignorant, of course they are going to use some auto-tune, and this is far from the egregiously robotic tuning of 2017's Beauty and the Beast, but I shouldn't be noticing it. And even though it wasn't over the top, I even noticed it during Rachel Zegler's songs. Now, I am certain that she did not need that much auto-tune. Especially when you have amazing musicals like Wicked in the immediate consciousness, you need to raise your game. I don't need every musical movie to be sung live on set, but they just need to do better on the production and writing of the songs. Film is a visual medium, so my biggest overall issue with this film is how ugly it is. For some people, the cinematography, lighting, and color grading is not going to be their biggest issue, but I personally really struggle with films that have a bad presentation. I'm sure no one is surprised to hear that the latest Disney live-action remake doesn't look good, but I'm still going to say it. The colors are washed out, the lighting is all over the place, and the green screen and CGI are average. The film is also full of CGI and green screen, and I just wish that it was more in camera. This world should be rich. I don't need it to be dark and gothic. It can be whimsical. I just need to get lost in it. But it looks so fake and lacking in effort. I don't understand why this film looks bad when its budget is so insanely high. No film should have a budget around $300 million, but if it's going to be, then I better be able to see every dollar on the screen. Here I go mentioning Snow White and the Huntsman again, but that film cost half as much as this to make, and it is absolutely gorgeous, a feast for the eyes that you seldom see from blockbusters these days. I honestly didn't hate this film. I think it's fine. It will be enjoyable enough for kids and families, but I don't think it will leave a lasting impression, and I don't think it is good enough when considering the budget and IP. It is also about 20 minutes too long. There are a number of scenes that feel tacked on that don't seem to advance the film's narrative very much. I like Mark Webb as a director. 500 Days of Summer is one of my favourite films, and honestly, The Amazing Spider-Man has got some great things about it, but you can hardly feel his touch here. Many of these corporate blockbusters lack the flavour of their directors, that seem to behave more like hired hands. They reek of studio executive overlords zapping the creativity out of the film. This may sound cynical and speculative, but this film truly feels as though it lacks heart and soul. It feels like it came from a conveyor belt. I don't feel the romance, I don't feel Snow White's connection to the animals. It doesn't have those core elements that truly bring it to life. The screenplay is pedestrian, with the few great lines likely the result of Greta Gerwig's touch. The songs are mediocre and the film is ugly, but it expands upon the lore in a nice way and remains faithful to the original without being too faithful. Rachel Zegler gives a good performance that will carry most viewers through the film without loathing the experience. I want all films to be good, and I want all films to succeed, especially when considering the up and down nature of the exhibition industry's health of late. But despite not hating this film, I can't consciously recommend it. Go and watch Snow White and the Huntsman instead.